We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusovsky, aka Will Clue, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now. Hey, everybody, how we doing? Today we've got Mr. Pete Strouse, founder of InfoSec Connect, right? I got that right?
Yep.
All right, sweet. So, Pete, let's give you the 20-30 seconds to kind of tell us who you are and why we care.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Will. I have been recruiting in security for about a decade now. Got my start on the internal recruiting side, and I now own my own company, InfoSec Connect. We help companies, high-growth companies of all shapes and sizes, hire a bunch of security people. So, yeah, also run a podcast called Talent Gap Fireside Chat, as you can see behind me, my little background there, talking about hiring in the field.
That's outstanding, yeah. And this is all circular. I think most of the people who've been on my show, I've been on theirs or will be. So it's all pay it forward for everybody, right? So today we're going to chat about the talent gap, which is, so I call this fact or fiction because I think there's some things that are factual and there's some things that are fictions. But I guess, kind of just to kick it off, like, kind of give everybody listening, like, what do what's the summary of the talent gap or perceived talent gap in the world today from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, sometimes I refer to it as the talent bottleneck instead of the talent gap, because I think the talent is out there. It's just a question of, do the people have the exact skills that a hiring manager wants to hire at any given time? And in the right quantities. So basically, we have this giant bubble of people that have been promised the world by the certification companies, degree programs, boot camps, where they're taught, I guess, some very basic security skills. So we have tens of thousands of those people. I always put the number at, and then we have at any given time, a few hundred open entry-level security jobs, maybe. And then on the other side of that, once they get about a year of experience, depending on the subdiscipline of security, companies can't hire enough of certain disciplines. Like recently, it's been all about AppSec, DevSecOps, OT security, a lot of these niche, very technical fields. In the last couple of years, it's been a very strange market. Up until 2023 or so, hiring was hot and heavy. A lot of venture capital investment, so a lot of companies hiring security people for all sorts of different things. GRC hiring has been extremely slow over the last couple of years. DFIR slowed down there for a while. Now it seems to be coming back, and looking into 2025, it does look like the job market is picking up for the new year, post-election too. So I'm very happy to see that. But yeah, long story short, I think there's little talent gaps in certain disciplines, not so much in others, and it's not evenly distributed.
Right. I think, and to your point too, like, I know I've talked to people wanting to get into the industry, even coming out of college. Like you said, there's not a lot of entry point. There's not a lot of entry points for newer people, but even those of us who have been established and stuff, I always refer to it as the diamond, right? The need is always in the middle of the diamond where it's biggest, but at the top and the bottom is the smallest amount of need. So guys like me have to spend a long time finding the right place to get to the top, and everybody coming out of school or boot camp are looking for those few spots there at the bottom of it. You think that's kind of where the disconnect is, or is it something, I don't want to say nefarious, but is it something more than that?
I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a bell curve like almost anything else. So at least the demand curve is, because it seems like everybody wants to hire the individual contributor that can do everything. Nobody wants to pay the salaries of the executives and things, especially in a down market. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
What's your recommendations for those, in this? So like, I come from a services background, a consulting and managed services side. We usually don't have a problem getting talent for the most part, because it tends to be where people want to work. But sometimes, like you said, it's the price range. So I guess, thinking about those in the industry who are either looking for work or looking to hire, what are some key things they can be doing to, well, let's say wanting to hire? What are some key things those people in those businesses, those hiring managers, those talent acquisition folks, the leaders of those organizations can do to make sure they get those seats filled?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is try to figure out the size of your overall candidate pool. So if you're looking for a very specific skill set in a specific geography, depending on what the discipline or skill set is, you could be looking at literally a handful of people that fit that job, in which case you have to pare that number down, whatever it is, down to some fraction of that number as far as the chances of actually filling that role with somebody who's interested, qualified. Basically every step. So if you were to look at an overall candidate pool, you can say it's 100 people, and you reach out to all 100 of those people as a recruiter on behalf of a hiring manager. You'll probably get, roughly 10 to 20% response rate. Mine tend to be a little bit higher because my messages are really good, but I think most people get like 10%. So you're only left with 10 people of that 100 people in that talent pool, and that's just people that respond to your message. Then about half are going to drop off due to scheduling conflicts, or maybe they found something else. So now you're left with 5. You might talk to all 5 people, and only 3 of them are really good fits and interested. Then you pare that down to a couple of people that actually go through the interview process, and if you're lucky, you'll get one person that accepts an offer and starts. So and that's just with a candidate pool of 100. So if you're looking at 20 people, it gets even worse. So you really need to have at least multiple hundreds of people in your candidate pool to make a successful hire in most cases.
Well, as soon as they're posting that app, they're getting 200 applicants in like 20 minutes, right? So
yeah. Well,
how many of those are qualified, by the way?
Usually 5% or so.
5% are qualified.
5-10%, if that. And the challenge nowadays with the internal recruiting teams, they tend to be running kind of lean. I've heard from internal recruiters, they're trying to fill 20, 30 open jobs at once. There's no possible way they can get through all those applicants, get back to everybody. It's just a broken system. And I think a lot of this could be solved just by doing outbound recruiting, by hiring managers stressing the importance of going out to the market and finding people that are more likely to be a fit versus posting and praying, basically the way I call it. Just posting a job, hoping for the best, and only getting back to a small handful of people, and just ignoring everybody else, which frustrates everybody and wastes everybody's time. So,
yeah, I know. When I just got the last place I was at, the place I was at before where I'm at now, almost everybody we hired was a referral, was somebody else knew who it was. And then, my most recent stint in looking, I don't think I got an interview that wasn't like, I had to network to get that interview, right? There was no, so, I mean, there's, we talk about the perceived talent gap, then I think there's definitely some fluff on the numbers, and most people like you I've talked to, and even other CISOs who know what they're doing, they'll say, hey, I can post a job and I can hire somebody in a week. Like I'm able to find the talent. But I guess for those of us on the other side looking for the talent, is this way just broken? Do we need to change it? And what's the future look like for, is it we just relying on building networks for the rest of our lives? Like not routing and switching, but actually people networks? Is that the only way we can work anymore?
I mean, that seems to be the way it's headed. I think ironically, the more automation we have, the more AI is involved in both, creating or modifying resumes. And then on the sorting side, ranking candidate resumes, not auto rejecting people. That's a myth. But actually ranking candidate resumes, and then the recruiters only skim the first few off the top of the ranking system, basically. But the more that happens, the more that automation is involved, the more crucial it becomes on both sides to do more work to break through all the noise. So as a recruiter, your job is to find the best qualified candidate, not necessarily the one that just so happened to get through the system or, modified their resume perfectly via AI. But on the candidate side, I mean, you almost have to do a bunch of extra crazy things that you didn't have to do 10 years ago, just because there is so much noise and you have so much competition, the vast majority of which is not qualified. So ironically, the more we lean into technology, the more those human connections become important. I don't know if we'll ever hit a point where, the pendulum has swung so far to where people are having to do all this extra work just to get an audience. So then all of a sudden everybody just abandons the whole AI idea. Maybe that happens, but for now, I think it's all about referrals and networking.
Yeah, it's well, it's interesting, and I think we've talked about this before on LinkedIn, at least, and the idea of like I tailor my resume when I submit it for a role, but I also assume that somebody's going to look at it and read it, and the AI may be looking for someone who understands PCI and NIST and ISO, and maybe I just put I have 25 years of GRC experience, and the AI doesn't necessarily correlate that. And it's similar. It's funny because I was just talking about automation and pen testing. People were like, well, if you just automate it, if you just use AI to do your pen testing, that's never a pen test. That's a scan. That's some type of automation. But you use it to, like you said, it's basically let's do the things that we do all the time anyway, and get that out of the way, and then get the person in who can be creative, who can correlate, who can think of different ways to use the system. And in this case, somebody who understands security and is hiring for that position can be like, oh, well, here's a highly experienced person who has this background, or especially there's all kinds of terminology that sometimes I'm not going to say it's interchangeable, but we interchange it a lot of times. So that, to me, that human element is even more important now. So I guess I would think we need to make the AI, like, I like the idea of that ranking to kind of get out, but like I'm curious as to who's programming it, how it's how those decisions are getting made. And as with anything in AI, the more and more we use it wrong, the more it just continues to proliferate incorrectly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I've researched a fair amount of these systems, and I consider myself an expert sourcer, as they say in the recruiting game, where you're going out and you're finding people on LinkedIn or wherever. And it seems like half the time, what I'm looking for isn't what's there, it's actually what's not there. So, like, if I look at somebody that's a senior security consultant at a firm that I know does both DFIR and pen testing and GRC, if I see DFIR and pen testing on their well, it wouldn't be both usually, but if I see one of those, I know it's probably not the other two. So I'm making a value judgment in my head, and I'm thinking through the problem. What's most likely to be this person's actual background versus what do I actually see on the page or on the screen? And as far as I can tell, none of the systems that exist now are that good. If we ever get some sort of artificial general intelligence, maybe we'll get to that point. I think jury's still out on that if we're going to get that sort of thing, and if we do, if it's ever going to make its way into sourcing and recruiting. I mean, at the end of the day, I think humans appreciate that human interaction that you can only get through talking to somebody. But yeah, I don't know. It's certainly imperfect as is.
Yeah, well, and again, the system hasn't changed since the dawn of getting a job. Basically, all we've done is put technology kind of in the way, right? So, and I get that, because if you've got, yeah, I mean, no, there's problems on both sides of it as I see it. Don't apply for, it's one thing to like apply for that stretch job where I've got 50-60% of these skills. And honestly, I'll tell everybody out here listening on the services side and the technology side, hire somebody who doesn't have a few of those bullet points you need, because otherwise, what do you have to offer them if they're already doing the same job and you just want them to move over to you? It's not going to be compelling. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for that. But yeah, at the end of the day, if that's all we're looking at is do they match this stuff, and those applying for the role shouldn't apply for a job where we can't do it. And just like the joke is everybody with 2 years of experience applies to be a CISO, right? Like you said, 5% of those things are done. So I guess and then on the hiring side, like, we need to have people actually looking at it. So that's where I think AI could be a little more helpful, is like, let's weed through the noise, but then actually take a look at the realistic candidates. On the idea of this gap, right? And for those who don't know listening, there's this idea that there's millions and millions of jobs available and nobody's around to fill them. And I think, as Pete just said, there's there's some jobs available and there's people usually there, and depending on how unicorn you're looking, you can get it. But I guess my question is, this sort of perceived gap, or sort of the continually, like, we know all the analysts love talking about it, but like, who wins? Like, what's the point in having in talking about this gap? Like, who's benefiting from all of that?
Yeah, and I like to talk about that a lot because I think it is important to look at the motivations. Who has something to gain by um, proliferating this idea of a gap? Honestly, I think it's just anybody selling any sort of training for security, whether it's certifications, degree programs, boot camps. In fact, any of the open job numbers that you see, like I just saw today, 457,000, I think, was the number open jobs according to Cyberseek right now in security. Um, that seems vastly inflated to me. The only scenario in which I could see that making sense would be if they included every single government job that won't be filled for at least a year because of their process. And they're not getting people applying to those jobs for various reasons. Lack of clearances, don't want to take a drug test,
Right.
all that sort of thing. So I think those numbers tend to mislead people into thinking there are more openings that they're actually going to be considered for than there are. And I think it's all just it's a money game, really, at the end of the day. The folks that have to benefit from these numbers are the ones selling the training that benefit from the perceived gap.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's and I'm just trying to think about that, the gap existing. Like you said, it's definitely for those thinking, oh, I can get into this industry, or I can pivot into this industry, or even, hey, I'm looking for a job. How are there 500,000 openings and there's not one for me? And I think part of that is, people forget how diverse security is. I've been doing this for almost 25 years. I can't be a pen tester. I can't work DFIR. I'm not going to work in a SOC. I'm not going to do application security. I mean, like, 90% of the roles out there aren't a fit for me. I can lead any one of those teams, right? But those positions are few and far between. So I think it'd be nice if we had a way to kind of maybe pare that down, um, to kind of help those know where they need to go, or where they need to build those skills up at. I mean, I think if I was selling training, that would be more useful to me, is to say, like, hey, there's 200,000 application security jobs open, right? That's where and I'll tell you, when I talk to and mentor people, I tell them to get into identity or application security, because to me, those areas are going to be available for a very long time. I don't know if you see anything similar, or any specific areas you think you have some drill down into.
Yeah, well, I think there's a big issue we have in the field with security being seen as a cost center versus a revenue enabler, profit center. So the majority of the hiring I see happening these days is with security product companies and MSSPs, where their new security hires are revenue generating in some way, or first or second order away from revenue generating. They're closer to the money, basically, than somebody who's viewed purely as a cost center. So yeah, I think AppSec for sure, DevSecOps, and cloud security,
Yeah.
Niches, especially where there's some physical component like OT security, critical infrastructure. I think those areas will continue to be in demand. Whereas GRC, for instance, it's starting to look like it's more and more automated. It's more of a checkbox thing. It's less of a actual move towards better security. So yeah, I think you're totally right that viewing the field as a monolith and addressing an overall number of security openings doesn't really give you any valuable information,
Right.
since it is such a wide and deep and diverse field.
Well, it's interesting because I see, like the maturation of those roles. Like, if I look at GRC, I'm happy that they're automating it, because there's a lot of that needs to be automated. But the ability to go in and audit and do that stuff, and honestly, that's where your leaders kind of, I won't say that's where your leaders come from, but that's what your leaders have to understand to drive and run a program, right? So I can see that, especially kind of narrowing down and being more focused into, hey, let's just, at this stage, we've kind of automated a lot of this stuff out. We don't necessarily need the school bus anymore, but we definitely need some high value people who can build and run these programs. Where OT is still very much, boots on the ground, configuring stuff. How do we plug this into the SOC? I'm curious. You mentioned OT a couple times. Is that something you've seen, like actively hiring an IT and IoT, and is that in the security companies, or is that in what I would call our client companies?
I only bring it up because I've noticed some of my competitors pretty regularly posting those jobs, and just logically, it would follow that that's something that's going to continue to be in demand, especially with global unrest and potential for more attacks on the U.S. By nation states and such. Just like I think DFIR is probably never going away, and it's never going to be fully automated away either. Yeah,
by no means. And I'll give another plug for identity. People don't realize when you do an incident response, there's always an identity person there, because again, it's a different animal and you need to be looking at that kind of stuff. So another plug for those folks. Awesome. So Pete, where can we find you online on the interwebs?
So I'm on LinkedIn, probably one of the most active people on LinkedIn you've ever seen. Also, my website is InfoSec Connect, all run together, 1C in the middle, .com. And, check out the podcast on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, man. It's been great. And we could probably talk about this for hours, I'm sure. Maybe we'll do another session for sure.
Sounds good. Thanks, Will.
Thanks.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillClue or visit at willclue.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.